Welcome to Shamanism 109. We're working with the energy of the wood element and the archetype of the warrior. So let's get into the whole energy of growth and expansion and look at the mess of life. Because life is messy. Let's be real with each other. All right? And I'm not necessarily talking about the mess of daily life. This isn't a talk about how to wash your dishes or even why it's important for the energetics of things to keep your stuff, your home, in order. I'm going to talk about the messiness of being alive. And I want to give you some deeper insights from a shamanic perspective about life and mess. Because it is as true for me as it is for you. Just when you think you have things in order, something completely unexpected will happen. And this mess of real life is there to give us an insight into the issues under the surface. And this is where our shamanic practice can really help us. This mess is there to help us create more powerful questions for our journeys. And the mess will also help to show us precisely how our heart spirit is calling us into deeper alignment with our true self. So in order to make sense of mess, we need to master what's called mess divination. We need to come into right relationship with our gifts and step into our power. And this is what we're going to look at today, mess divination. So let's start first by looking at a few ways that we sometimes in our ignorance go about handling the messiness of our lives. And these things clearly aren't working. So the first is blame. And I've put here a quote from the Tao, which is, "The moment we blame others, our destiny turns away from us." When we blame others or even ourselves for our mess, we often do this, right? We fall into this trap. But it always means that we miss the point. Because there usually is a point to our mess. And it's our task to learn to divine what that is. And we're going to miss it if we're blaming. We need a healthy dose of discernment so that we can figure out what the hell just happened. But self-accusations, blaming are not useful. The second issue that can get in our way is judgment. Judgment about the mess is a huge waste of our energy and time. Judgment about how stupid the mess is, or how stupid you are for having created the mess, or how stupid you are for having created this mess again. Or how you always make this kind of mess at this time because you don't believe you deserve better, or any of these typical ways of overly processed self-help habit thoughts that you've learned to rationalize when you do what you do will simply not serve you in dealing with the mess. These judgmental thoughts will always lead you down the wrong path. Again, discernment is important, but self-accusations and judgments are not serving you. The third is control. And control is another waste of time and creative energy that always leads us down the wrong path. There's an old myth that says that the trickster makes this world as we actually find it. The other gods set out to make a more perfect and ideal world, but this world that we're in, with its complexity and ambiguity, its beauty and its dirt, was the trickster's creation, and the work is not finished. So we're not in control. Trying to be in control, or wanting to be in control, is asking your life to send you topsy-turvy to remind you to get real. It's like you're daring the universe to remind you who's really boss here. These many ways that we as adults continue to behave come out of a motivation to control things. This desire to control is childish. It's coming out of our childhood desire, so we continue this controlling behavior as adults. But doing this is asking our life again and again to show us that we really aren't in control, so that we get a grip on what's really going on here, that we're not in control, and that we need to become the kind of people that don't desire to be in control. Our actual desires, our true desires, are more in the direction of mastery of life. And mastery of life doesn't mean that we're in control of everything. It's more the sense of wanting to be in charge of ourselves, the space we inhabit, and our fears. So going back to the list, blame, judgment, and control will not work with the real mess of life, but will lead you astray and away from the ever so fine and age-old art of mess divination. So how do we engage with the messiness of life? Well, we have to start at the base, understanding what mess is. It's in the meeting and merging of our comfort and our discomfort, the daily practice of stepping into our discomfort that brings us into who we are and awakens us into how we can align our lives to keep stepping into that discomfort. Without going out of our comfort zone, we will never get perspective. We need that perspective to get deeper insight into ourselves, and that only comes from moving deeply into the belly of our discomfort zone and set up a base there. In most situations, you begin to generate the energy you need to transform through injury at a level of hurt that is utterly unnecessary for the lessons that life is actually trying to teach you. Even the trickster doesn't need you down there banging your head at the bottom of your discomfort. We just need to be where life is happening and where we are able to be in a co-creative relationship with spirit. The comfort zone are the place where we are so comfortable with ourselves that these are the places where we are dead. We're dead or dying in the comfort zone. This isn't to say that you should not cherish yourself and take care of yourself and be comfortable and gracious, but it's saying, what I am saying is that we're growing and alive in our willingness to risk being uncomfortable. I know that you know what I'm referring to here, and you can probably think of some examples from your own life to prove the truth of what I'm saying. So on this model here, you have your comfort zone, your fear zone, your learning zone, and then your growth zone. So life happens outside of the comfort zone. It's important to recognize that much of what we consider the mess in life is simply moving us, or even a part of us, shoving ourselves into the discomfort zone. It's important to recognize that without discomfort, there's no growth, there's no life. We have to show up. We have to know our boundaries and respond to what comes up against us. That's where we're alive. So it's in this messiness of life where we aren't so good at things, where we make mistakes, where we have to say we're sorry. This is the place where life is happening, where we are the most alive. In that desperate gracelessness, we plunge into the possibility of the discomfort. If we want to grow, we have to grow out of being a child with our parents so that we can create an adult relationships with our adult parents. We have to step out of the known. This is where we are the most alive. The path that leads to a greater truth is different from the path that we've been on. We're most alive in the moment when we risk uncertainty and vulnerability and pain in offering our life's work in the world instead of choosing safety and more comfort. So this is part of the reason that life is messy, and partly life is messy because making this world is a creative process. We often need to be tripped into focusing on where we truly need to focus. There are many reasons life is messy, but the biggest reason has to do with the creation process. And this is one of the things that we need to understand about creativity. When we awaken to ourselves and we start to align with our true selves, we inevitably come to realize it's a creative process. It involves making a mess. And this is why I personally prefer using the word harmony to using balance, because it's so easy to misunderstand the energy of balance. Balance can be such a limiting concept. It's important to understand that even though balance and moderation, there has to be a messiness there for there to be a dynamic flow of life happening. Otherwise, balance isn't balance. It's more like a stasis or some kind of equilibrium moving towards stagnation or something equally unhealthy. For us to truly call ourselves alive and conscious and aware and maturing, we have to be willing to be in the messiness of life. We need to be willing to make a mess. We would like it to be this perfect, exquisite balance, this sort of perfect point where everything is in order, but that's not reality. And if you try to convince yourself of that, you'll get stuck because you'll be so afraid to risk losing your balance. And you have to be willing to risk if you're going to be able to create the next thing. We have to be willing if we want to be creative. We have to be willing to make a mess. And I'm not giving you permission now to misbehave. That's not what I'm saying. It's more this understanding that it's in the mess and in the discomfort and in the uncertainty that we discover the things that we want to bring forward. It's in our reacting to everything that we're beginning to be able to respond. And remember always that you have spirit help. This is why we journey. We journey to get guidance and assistance when things get really weird. When we incorporate our daily practices into our life, we create a life of greater grace and balance and harmonious relationships. But we can't be afraid to make a mess of things. There's just no way to avoid it. It's always a shock at first, but hopefully as we mature spiritually, we begin to recognize our particular flavor of messiness that we make. And as we keep growing on this spiritual journey, the next level of maturity that we see is a massive accomplishment. It's an accomplishment to start over, to suck, to know nothing, to make a mess. That messiness gives us an opportunity to reach for greater grace. Now, we're working in a time and space where there's this profound bias towards order, towards light workers, and the light workers are being quite loud. But for us shamans on this path, we're not giving preference towards light or choosing one over the other. We're here to explore energy in all its forms and manifestations, both light and dark, order and chaos. So shamanically speaking, even the mess is a priceless process because the mess exposes what's really going on below the surface. It's not all love and light. That's not reality. That's not the reality that we're in. So a deep part of shamanism has always been about seeing in the dark and going underground, going into the underworld, going into the lower realms, and how we move into the things that are not yet illumined in a good way without judging them as bad or dark in a negative sense, or all these things that we have a tendency to do from our human selves, from our ego. And many people say that shamanism is about healing. It's not about transformation, but here's what I want to say about that. You can't heal without transformation. So shamanism is very much about this ability to delve deeply into what's under the surface, to see the connections between things, the real energies, and to really discover what is really real. The mess is priceless. It exposes what's really going on, not overtly like signed on a billboard in front of you, but indirectly. There's this eruption, something happens, and this is a fantastic opportunity to be in the midst of the mess of our lives, for us to master our skill of seeing reality. And we can go there if we have the courage to see, to look. And we live in a time now where there's a lot of orientation towards always reaching forward, to go ahead, light, manifest more, manifest better, harder, faster. And then we have the shamanic perspective, which is we're standing in the center between the dark and the light, looking at, okay, what's the simplest, most effective way to get the real energy that's going on in the situation? How can we lift the everydayness up? We have to change what's normally present so that we can get an opportunity to gain insight into what's below, what's really going on. And if we can see what's really going on, we can ask better questions. If our questions are based on a superficial misunderstanding of the problem, the answers we're going to get are not going to be very helpful or insightful. This is fundamental. If we understand the problem, if we really understood the problem, we probably wouldn't be in the problem in the first place. So we have to see the mess. We have to look at the mess. We have to be comfortable with the mess, and we have to learn to love it. Because another value of the mess is that it helps us reset our priorities, and it helps us cut out what is not necessary. And then we can change what we see as the problem, or we can change the question. The mess often exposes a truth that maybe we were hiding, or maybe we were afraid of, or maybe it was so subconscious in ourselves that we didn't even know it was there. The truth is often something that we don't want to know. So there's another thing about after asking questions and crafting good journey questions, is that we have to love the mess. because the mess is there to help change our attitude. The mess is there to help us expose what really needs to be seen by you, so that you can come into your journey with a different attitude. If you don't love the mess and you're irritated and cranky and grumpy and think, I don't get it, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with this, then of course your questions are going to come from that place. So for example, there's this underlying irritation in your life. You might have to really not necessarily look at that irritation, but what's underneath the irritation, so that you can find the actual feelings to help you get the actual question. Another aspect that people don't realize about asking good journey questions is that we need to connect to our intuitive body to get information. It's really important that we clarify the questions, because if we're just coming from our heads, we can come up with 50 different questions. But when we start to tune into our truth chord, we can sort out all those questions based on which ones actually ring true for us, which ones have resonance with our intuition. We can go even further by looking at which ones are connected to our deeper felt sense of what's going on, not just in our head, in our full body experience. So when we use our physical experience, our somatic sense, our visceral sense of our experience, it interrupts these patterns in our mind. It interrupts our sleeping state. It interrupts our regular habit patterns, and it allows us to connect with truth. The truth of feeling, the truth of internal sense perspectives, that feeling that we can't necessarily put a name on, but we know when it's real. And we use those parts of us to ask better questions. Now, for this to really work, we also need to talk about these two kind of aspects of ourselves that we call the ego and the adventurer. So the ego we know of, and the ego has this desire to be in the now, the desire to live your life's purpose now. And that all this mess is just a distraction, and it's taking you away from your life's purpose. But then you have this part of you that's the adventurer. And the adventurer desires adventure. It wants to come out of the comfort zone. It wants to break free from these limiting beliefs. And actually, the adventurer is the one that takes you on this journey, this adventure, this windy path that takes you out of your comfort zone, which is where you need to go in order to grow into the person who you need to be, the person who can actually manifest your soul's purpose. The ego has a very low tolerance for mess. The adventurer has a huge tolerance for mess. And the adventure quite often creates a lot of the mess. But the important thing is the ability that we need to take charge of, this ability, the skill to discern what in the mess was valuable, what's changed, what in the mess has allowed us to come into greater alignment with ourselves so that we can bring that into the world. So the ego and the adventurer is this dynamic duo that we can engage with and cultivate this relationship so that we can use the dynamic energy that is created in this duo to manifest through our hearts into the world. So what do our hearts want? Well, it's not just the ego and the adventure. Let's talk a little bit about the spirits of our heart, because sometimes life gets messy because our heart spirits are trying to align messes to make us stand up and take attention before there's a heart attack or heart disease. But sometimes we don't listen. We don't listen to our heart. We're perhaps stuck in our minds or somewhere else. So the heart can get ignored. We can see it as annoying because in our mind's eye, things need to make sense, but that's not the reality of the heart. So for the heart, we have these two energies, the Shin and the Ling. And the Shin is the outer heart spirit. It's the heart that you show to the world. When we live with our Shin, we're looking for validation and satisfaction and acknowledgement from the outside or everywhere but from ourselves. So the alignment between the Shin and the Ling can become problematic. And life can therefore create mess as sort of an act for self-correction. The heart is trying to bring itself back into alignment. And so what's important is that the Ling and the Shin need to be aligned. That inner part of our heart and that outer part of our heart. When that's misaligned, the mess of our lives is often there to show us the way that they're not aligned. And the Ling is the spirit that we talk to only, our inner experience. And we talk to the Ling about our deep desires. So when we choose to listen to the Ling and the true desires of our heart, we acknowledge that conversation and we bring out the energy into the world. We then need that protection of the Shin energy, because otherwise we can become too vulnerable. We can get trampled on. If we just share our Ling energy with the world, we can literally be energetic roadkill. So the Ling needs to be protected, and this is where the Shin comes in. So that, again, that relationship between these two parts, the inner and the outer, need to be aligned so that we can be in the world in a way that is harmonious and balanced. So we need to be aligned and balanced, and we must listen, and listen in a way that is good, so that we can be in the world in a way that is good, both for our health and our energetic well-being, but also within the greater story of things. So a shaman will present a truth that's different than other stories, and the way that we find the truth of our own stories is through our journeys. We have to be willing to stand in the center of that storm, that dissonance between what we're being told on the outside and what we know on the inside, that wisdom through our own personal first-hand experience. We have to feel what's really going on in us, and so that the exposed mess of how did I get here, all these messes in life that are there to help us get to the heart of things, get to the depth, get to the root of things, to lead us to the divine. All these messes are here for us to divine what is exposed through the mess, so that we can come into a higher consciousness and a greater alignment with truth within ourselves. So here we are, mess divination. It's a big part of this teaching, and there are many offerings, many ways that we define truth. But the mess we begin with is the message. The mess is there to help us see the unintegrated shadow selves and how that mess creates our lives through our unconscious energy. We have to look at the stories that we tell. Even these stories about, being feminine, or the story of being a masculine, the stories of our stories, how we create in life, our ancestors, our helping spirits, and clean up the messes of those who came before us, even though it's not necessarily our personal mess, but it's a mess that we're linked to by blood. And because we're linked to it by blood, we have the permission to clean it up. And if we have the permission and the ability, it's our responsibility. So there's many messes in life. But the big story that I'm sharing today is that the messiness of life is a great gift. And I prefer to use the word harmony over balance when I talk about these messes, because in the big picture, the mess is a harmonious thing. If it's not something that you do, if it's not something that you value, then you won't receive the message of your mess. It's important to remember that a mess in your life is often a reaction of a life that's held out of harmony, and it's the desire of that thing, that part, to come free of those limiting stories, limiting ideas of what you should be or how you should show up, or the fears that you hold yourself back from, and to come into a new space into your discomfort where you're able to explore. What are these places in our life? What are these stories that we tell ourselves that bring us out of balance? A lot of us don't risk feeling uncomfortable because it's a lot to deal with, but this is the work of the shaman. If you want to work with the why, you have to be honest with yourself. Your mess is your message. So the adventurer is the true journeyer. And if you're not feeling anything deep enough to ask any more of these questions, then let your life get a little bit more messy so that it's to the point where you can't find anything anymore. And that will give you the motivation to really start asking better questions. There are many ways to come out of this messy energy, but really the most important thing to understand is that the mess is often your life trying to bring itself back into harmony. It's often your heart trying to correct itself, trying to correct that misalignment between the inner heart and the outer heart. If your life is an expression of your unique genius, how could it not be a mess? If you've been to the studio of an artist, you know what I'm talking about. I myself love to be creative, and wow, I make a real mess. But sometimes that mess is such a huge part, often always, it's a big part of the creative process. Let your creative genius free. Allow yourself to be messy. Set your heart free and use your mess to ask the questions, to look deeper. So the next step for you to do is to write a few journey questions to uncover the meaning of the mess in your life, and then go on a journey to get some clearer answers. Thank you for your time and your attention.